Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The man who runs the Lethbridge soup kitchen blasted the province, saying not enough is being done to address the homeless issue in our city. The province unveiled a new $1.4 billion cancer treatment centre in Calgary, set to open in 2024. And we hear from a documentary film producer who produced a film called Vancouver's Dying, addressing how drugs are killing so many in Canada's second largest city.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. A man who fights for the homeless here in our city says the Alberta government isn't doing enough to help our most vulnerable. Bill Ginther, the executive director of the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen, took to Facebook and blasted Alberta's Deputy Premier and Infrastructure Minister Nathan Neudorf. Ginther called on the province to do more to address the homeless issues here in our city.
For 5.5 years, I've been the director of the soup kitchen. I'm not an expert, but I have a front row seat, and I see these people. I know them by name. I know who's died last week and the week before. And I say nothing is happening. There's no housing. We've had 3 different news conferences over the course of the last several years. All this money that was earmarked from the federal government for the building of a 42-bed unit, nothing. There's no building. Do you see a building anywhere? So what I'm saying is that it is time to start taking action. Like, talk is so cheap and it means nothing.
Members of Lethbridge City Council say they're working with the province for potential funding to help build and implement a sober shelter in our city, including the potential of the Civic Eye Centre. Now, Bridge City News reached out to Infrastructure Minister and Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Neudorf for comment on the story, but did not hear back by our broadcast deadline. Officials with the Streets Alive mission in Lethbridge say they've seen an increase in those who are identifying as homeless in our city. Co-founder of the mission, Ken Kissick, says it appears more to do with the ongoing drug crisis and not as much due to inflation.
We are definitely seeing more homeless. For us, inflation, I don't think is a big factor yet. Okay, addiction remains the primary problem for most of these people. Now, certainly, we are starting to see that trickle-down effect of people at the low end of the rental scales and that are being pushed out and struggling to find places to live. Okay. But because of Lethbridge's community, people get taken into homes and extended family, but it's coming.
Ken Kissick from Streets Alive will discuss more of how they're trying to help the most vulnerable in our city. That's coming up in the second half of our program. The drug crisis and homeless problems are issues that affect a number of Canadians, including those in Vancouver. Aaron Gunn is a documentary film producer in British Columbia. He recently produced a film called Vancouver is Dying. He says while they were shooting the documentary, they were shocked to hear that those who were struggling with addictions sold the drugs they were freely given at the supervised consumption sites to purchase fentanyl from their dealers. Fentanyl, their desired drug of choice.
Was talking to a homeless gentleman in Vancouver, how these safe supply drugs were being, basically handed out like candy on Halloween to addicts who were then selling these drugs to their drug dealers or exchanging them for fentanyl, which is the drug that they actually wanted. And then these notionally less harmful substances were being resold on university campuses, college campuses, even high schools.
Catch this powerful interview about the documentary Vancouver is Dying with BC documentary producer Aaron Gunn and BCN's Naveen Day coming up later in our broadcast. The Alberta government unveiled what it called a new vision of hope. The Calgary Cancer Centre was unveiled and officially handed over to Alberta Health Services. The $1.4 billion facility is expected to officially open in 2024. Health Minister Jason Copping says 50% of Albertans may deal with some form of cancer during their lifetime. Copping says more capacity for cancer care is needed, especially with the increase of cancer surgeries which are being done today. Copping says cancer affects more than just the body.
It attacks people's mental health and well-being, and it impacts all those who love them. And this Calgary Cancer Centre will offer dedicated spaces for counseling and support, whether it's assessing the services of a psychologist or spending times in patient center areas to take a quiet moment to reflect and regroup. just like what you can see behind me. Even the design of the Calgary Cancer Centre, 2 buildings encircling each other around a central heart, reflects the integrative and supportive nature of the treatment and work that will take place here.
Minister Copping adds that last year there were 800,000 patients in Alberta who needed cancer care, which is a 100,000 patient increase from the year 2018. Alberta Justice Minister Tyler Shandro took to the podium to describe the importance and necessity of the Alberta Sovereignty within the United Canada Act. He says provinces were never intended to be in a lesser position to the federal government.
From the very start of Confederation, the House of Lords made it clear that the object of the laws which created Canada were neither to weld provinces into one, nor to subordinate provincial governance to a central authority. Canada was to have a federal government that represented all and would be entrusted with the administration of those items in which everyone had a common interest. But each province retained its own independence and autonomy. Our courts have likewise made it clear that provinces do not occupy a lesser position to the federal government, and that the principles of federalism are a political and legal response to the underlying political realities, social realities, and diversity of our nation. Now, for a long time, the federal government hasn't respected this division of powers. They have continued to encroach into Alberta's rightful jurisdiction. They have continued to demand that we do their bidding. And they have continued to add terms and conditions to their funding of what should be provincial programs.
And by the way, Bill 1, the Alberta Sovereignty Act, passed earlier this week in the legislature. Well, it was so nice to be above seasonal values once again in Lethbridge. Angela Stewart is out in the field again with an early peek at the forecast. I believe she's downtown. Angela, it appears as though a decent weekend is shaping up.
Yeah, Hal, a decent weekend is right. The temperature's not expected to be too cold, with the conditions not too terrible either. We will be experiencing some cloudy conditions throughout the weekend ahead, with those milder temperatures expected to kick in on Sunday. As for tonight, the wind chill sitting at -9 overnight. Expect a low of near -8. As for how the rest of the week is looking, I'll have all those details coming up later in the show.
Thanks so much, Angela. The Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedom says charges against a Freedom Convoy protester have been dropped. The protester, simply named as JW, was originally charged with interfering with the lawful use and enjoyment of property of downtown Ottawa residents, failure to obey a court order, and obstruction of justice for failing to identify himself to police. Justice Centre lawyer Hannah Parmar has more now on the case and joins us from Toronto. Hannah, why were all of the charges dropped?
Our outside counsel, Sam Goldstein, he's the defense counsel. He was assisting the JCCF in this matter, and he did a great job in vigorously negotiating with the Crown. And a couple of reasons why the charges were dropped, the main one being that the court ordered that JW, and I'll use his initials to protect his confidentiality, the order he was charged under actually applied to the Windsor blockades at the Ambassador Bridge. So the provincial government declared an emergency back in February. And defense counsel argued that it would be an abuse of power for the government to be able to use a Windsor court order and charge people in Ottawa. Unfortunately, the Crown agreed. And there was also a lack of evidence. And so the Crown agreed that it would be best to not proceed with the charges.
Now, is this precedent setting? What will this mean for many of the others who participated in the Freedom Convoy last February?
So each case will be different, and the facts for each case will be different as well. But what I can say is that it's very encouraging to see the Crown prosecutors be very reasonable and open when negotiating with the defense counsel, and that they're open to withdrawing charges when there's not enough evidence to proceed, or when it's in the interest of justice to withdraw the charges. And for the most part, these are law-abiding citizens who are simply exercising their right to protest. The Charter guarantees the right to protest, so we hope to see this trend carry forward.
Thanks so much for your time, Hannah. That was Hannah Parmar, lawyer with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, joining us from Toronto. The opposition to Bill C-21, or the Trudeau Liberals' gun ban, is growing, in particular the threat of banning hunting rifles, including shotguns. Conservative MP Dane Lloyd says he's hearing from more of those in Indigenous communities who are opposed to this potential legislation.
Yesterday, the Assembly of First Nations issued a declaration opposing Bill C-21 because it attacks treaty hunting rights. This Liberal government claims that there is no relationship more important than that with Indigenous peoples, but they failed to consult with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. When will they admit that they failed to respect the rights of Indigenous peoples and scrap Bill C-21?
For more than 20 years, I've been going to the Assembly of First Nations. I've been a part of the resolutions. I've been part of drafting those resolutions. I've been part of voting on those resolutions. I applaud the proactive advocacy of First Nations when they hear something that they don't quite understand. But I want to make it clear that First Nations hunting rights will always be respected by this government. We know it's a constitutional right. We know there is a constitutional element of this, and we will get it right, and Indigenous hunters will continue into the future.
The Premier of the Northwest Territories is the latest to speak out against the Trudeau Liberals' gun ban bill C-21. Caroline Cochrane says as the bill currently stands, she simply cannot get behind it.
At this point, as if they didn't look at the need for hunters, then I could not support it, because then I would be supporting people starving.
Can you talk a little bit more about the specific concerns that you have heard from hunters, from First Nations people, Indigenous people in the North?
Basically just what I've said. You can't take away our rifles, because if you take away our rifles, you're taking away our livelihood, our food source.
Redcliffe RCMP are looking for a suspect in connection with a robbery. Police say they responded to a call about a gas station on Broadway Avenue in Medicine Hat being held up in the early afternoon on November the 15th. Witnesses say the lone male entered the gas station with a firearm, then fled with an undisclosed amount of cash. Now, police provided photographs of the armed robbery suspect that were captured on video surveillance. The vehicle used in the robbery was located later in the evening from the Medicine Hat Police Service. If you can help police with their investigation, call either the Redcliffe RCMP or Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. A well-known musician will be up on the big screen when his new movie premieres in theaters tonight. Canadian country singer Corb Lund plays one of the lead roles in the movie called Guitar Lessons. It's an independent film that was shot in High-Level, Alberta. Now, the director of the movie says he and Lund worked before on past projects and knew he was the best choice for the role.
We'd worked together on a couple things before, and we knew each other and trusted each other, and I'm really glad he did. He did a great part. And he nailed it. He really brought some professionalism to his role, like he does in everything that all in his endeavors, and he did a great job. I'm really grateful for Corb. Corb is instrumental. We wouldn't be here doing this without him. So thank you to Corb and to Lethbridge for raising a Corb.
James says they were able to make the film for less than $500,000. That's pretty impressive. Now, speaking of impressive, over 500 displays are shining bright at the Festival of Nativities in Lethbridge. Organizers for the event say over 5,000 people attend annually, make their way around the church to browse the hundreds of pieces featuring nativity imagery. As BCN's Micah Quinn explains now, the event was held in a drive-through setting last year, and now organizers are fired up for everyone to check it out in person once again.
They're really remarkable pieces, and we hope that people will come and appreciate them.
When you make your way into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is located directly by the NMAX Center in Lethbridge, you'll see a plethora of nativity pieces. The Festival of Nativities has been held in our city since 2015, and officials say all the hardware you see before you are donated by members of the community.
Those are carefully collected, and there's a picture taken of each nativity, and great care is taken with each piece, and so they're returned safely to the people that donate them.
Organizers of the Festival of Nativities say they are trying to make the event as authentic as possible.
Even though it's not necessarily authentic, it's just something we've tried to portray a special feeling of what Bethlehem might have been like at that time.
It's there's 7 areas that we display things in the building.
Music will be played throughout the weekend as well by various local organizations.
Sometimes it's individuals, sometimes it's choirs, and it's basically a Christmas celebration every night.
For more information on the Lethbridge Festival of Nativities, you can visit their Facebook page. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
A local cheerleading club participated in one of the country's largest cheerleading events in Canada and was able to bring home some hardware. After 3 years, different divisions from Peak Elite Cheerleading traveled to Toronto and won the Judges' Choice and silver in the competition. Head coach Samantha Paradis says it feels great to have brought back these medals home to Alberta.
It's an honor to have brought back hardware to small city Lethbridge. We're the only team there from Alberta, and we are a very small gym, and that just puts us on the map with how excellent our cheerleaders are, and the coaching staff are amazing here at Peak, and we couldn't have done it without them or their parents. And it takes a village to get a team like this to travel provinces and do this well, and we couldn't be more proud.
Very talented young ladies, and very strong too. About 250 teams from around Canada participated in the competition. Well, it was another mild day across much of southwestern Alberta again today, and not a bad weekend is shaping up either. A full look at the weather picture is on deck. You know, the average high for this time of year is 0, so it's been nice being above that for a few days here this week in southwestern Alberta. Angela Stewart is out in the field. I believe she's downtown with all of the weather details right now. Angela, it looks like we should have a mild weekend as well with no snow in the forecast.
Yeah, Hal, that's right. The weekend is shaping up nicely. We are expected to get some warmer temperatures. And good news, there's no snow in the forecast. Saturday, 1 degree and a mix of sun and cloud. The wind chill -11 in the morning. Sunday, cloudy skies and -7. Cloudy on Monday and -11 for the high. Tuesday, -9 and a mix of sun and cloud. A mix of sun and cloud on Wednesday with -7 as the expected high. The average high for this time of year is 0, so we are slightly above that average. The average low is -11. The highest temperature recorded back on this day was 13 degrees back in 1957. The lowest temperature was -36 back in 1977. The sun rose at 8:16 this morning and it set at 4:31. Looking at temperatures across the country now for Saturday on the coast in Victoria, cloudy conditions with a chance of rain. The temperature will remain steady near 7 degrees. Periods of rain throughout the day in Vancouver, 5 for the high. There's also some light snow in the forecast for Edmonton, -7 for the high. Calgary is also expected to get some snow, -2 for the day. In Saskatoon, mainly sunny and -8 for the expected high, but the wind chill will be quite cool in the morning, -25 expected. Sunny conditions for Regina, the expected high -7. Looking to Winnipeg now, there is a chance of snow. There's also a risk of freezing rain in the morning, -2 for the day. To the central part of the country, in Toronto, mainly sunny and a high of 0 for the day. Ottawa, sunny conditions and -7. Shaping up beautifully in Montreal, sunny skies and -5. Chance of snow in Fredericton, about a 30% chance of the white stuff, -2 for the expected high. Halifax, a chance of rain or even snow, +2 for the day. Charlottetown, periods of light snow, reaching a high of -1. And St. John's, periods of light rain and 3 degrees for Saturday. And that's a look at your full forecast from Galt Gardens here in Lethbridge.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
Canadians who are sending Christmas parcels this holiday season may see a steep surcharge on domestic shipping due to the high price of diesel. Canada Post says the surcharge rose to nearly 40% last week on domestic parcels and fell slightly this week to around 37%. Officials say the fuel-based surcharge has been a standard company practice for more than 20 years and is based on the average price of diesel. Despite the increase, Canada Post anticipates a busy Christmas shopping season. Reports say the Postal Service has hired an additional 4,500 staff and brought on 1,550 more vehicles to accommodate the holiday shipping surge. A new report recommends Canada's corporate boards should sharply increase their diversity. The report from the TMX Group and the nonprofit Institute of Corporate Directors says women should make up at least 40% of boards. That is nearly double the level found in the survey in 2021. The report says companies listed on the TSX should be required to either disclose or explain why they're not putting more women onto their boards. It also says 30% of members should also be members of underrepresented racial groups, Indigenous, or with disabilities. Roots is reporting lower than expected third quarter earnings as its sales dropped 8.5% from a year ago to $69.8 million. The Toronto clothing retailer says its net income dropped to $2.2 million from $10.1 million in the same quarter last year. Analysts were expecting a profit of $8.1 million. Officials at Root say the results were impacted by more pronounced discounting in the quarter and a move away from casual fleece wear as people return to offices and events. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 22 points on the day to finish at 19,947. The Dow was down 305 points to 33,476. The S&P 500 was down 29 on the day to 3934, and the Nasdaq was down 77 points to 11,004. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 44 cents to 71.02 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 28 cents to 6.25 US. Gold was up 8.19 to 17.9733 US an ounce, and silver was up 41 cents to 23.47 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12.41 per bushel, barley's at $9.79, canola's at $19.48, and corn is at $11.60 per bushel. Live cattle were up $1.25 to $153.68. Feeder cattle January contract was up 45 cents to $183.93, and lean hogs were down 43 cents to $81.58. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 73.29 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the Alberta government unveiled what it calls a new vision of hope. The Calgary Cancer Centre was unveiled and officially handed over to Alberta Health Services. The $1.4 billion facility is expected to officially open in 2024. Health Minister Jason Copping says 50% of Albertans may deal with some form of cancer during their lifetime, so more capacity for cancer care was needed. The drug crisis has impacted so many communities across Canada. Coming up, we chat with the producer of the documentary called Vancouver is Dying. Aaron Gunn will explain how drugs have negatively impacted the Lower Mainland in British Columbia. Watch for that powerful interview with BCN's Naveen Day shortly. If you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
The opioid crisis continues to rage on across our country, killing thousands every year. A documentary has been produced discussing this very important subject and how it has impacted so many communities. The documentary, called Vancouver is Dying, premiered in October and has now garnered over 2 million views on YouTube. The host and camera crew walked the streets of Vancouver, BC without a filter, showing what life is like in those tent cities and hearing firsthand how opioids have impacted so many. Here is a sneak peek.
People are afraid in Vancouver. You shouldn't have to walk down the street looking over your shoulder, but that's the way it is now.
You just kind of get used to this being part of what it means to be a Vancouverite. This isn't normal, and this is actually something wrong, and that we should hold our political leaders accountable for presiding over something that is clearly not okay.
We had a good city in the 90s. What the f happened, man?
What is happening to Vancouver? One of the wealthiest and most naturally beautiful cities in all of North America has been beset by skyrocketing crime, violent attacks, and a crippling battle with addiction that's literally left thousands of people dead. But what is at the root of all these problems? Do police have the tools they need to do their jobs? Are violent offenders being released with little to no regard for public safety? And has an ideological obsession with so-called safe supply and free drugs overshadowed the desperate need for treatment, recovery, and rehabilitation?
Harm reduction. Somebody's got a sense of humor, man. Because that shit ain't helping nobody, man. It's helping everybody get high more.
Everywhere you look that this stuff has taken hold significantly, the cities have become destroyed.
Wow, just a different side of Vancouver. Now joining me is Canadian filmmaker and producer Aaron Gunn. Aaron, thank you so much for joining us on Bridge City News today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Aaron, let's get started. What inspired you to begin researching the backstory behind the current opioid crisis impacting Vancouver?
Well, the big thing to me was I noticed a huge disconnect. Talking to friends, family, people that work in Vancouver, that obviously whatever we were doing wasn't working. The problem was getting worse. Crime was getting worse. Open drug use was rampant. And yet the politicians seemed to think that everything was going okay. The policies that we were doing were having results. And the only issue was we weren't going far enough. And I noticed that there was a disconnect there, that the rhetoric and the evidence on the ground wasn't matching up. And we wanted to do a little bit of old school investigative journalism and try to connect the dots and find out exactly what was happening.
We were just chatting before this interview how these images that you have in this documentary just don't line up with the way I personally experienced Vancouver in the 90s, and even that one lady saying, what the happened. So what is it like to live there? Your documentary paints a picture where even nice neighborhoods are plagued with random acts of violence.
Yeah, so what used to be contained to what's known as the downtown east side has been spreading out to other areas. If you know Vancouver, areas like Gastown, Kitsilano, and Yaletown will be familiar to you. These are areas obviously that are nice neighborhoods that have very high property values. People pay and have paid a lot of money to live there. And these issues have basically been spiraling out of the downtown east side. There's open drug use all over the place in all different parts of Vancouver. And probably the scariest part is, as you alluded to, these what are known as random stranger attacks. And there's on average 4 random stranger attacks every day in Vancouver. These are people that are walking around minding their own business who are getting violently assaulted. And so we wanted to look into why that was happening. And because it's a cause for concern to many people living in Vancouver. And we interviewed, including a mother of one of the victims of these random stranger attacks, who was walking around Kitsilano in the evening, which is a real upscale neighborhood of Vancouver, and was brutally assaulted by 2 men, had to have facial surgery and things like that. It was a very sad story.
I know I've heard a lot of random stranger attacks here in Lethbridge, and of course, like Lethbridge, no doubt has a very significant opioid crisis here as well. I appreciate how the documentary made an effort to highlight those who are in recovery as well. What was the biggest thing you learned after speaking with those who are struggling with addiction?
Well, one thing I will say is we went into this documentary, producing this documentary, seeing the problems firsthand that were happening on the street, but there were some things that really shocked us. And the most revealing interviews for sure were both the people that were still living on the streets in the downtown east side in Vancouver, and also those who were recently and have since recovered. And one of the things that we really that shocked me was you may have heard this after making this documentary. I think it's an oxymoron, this term safe supply, which is basically the government providing what are notionally less dangerous opioids at taxpayers' expense to addicts. And one of the 2 things that we heard that shocked me the most is the individuals who were most antagonized by that, who were most opposed to that, were those who were in recovery or who have gone through the recovery process and were sober, who told me point blank, and this isn't just one person, this is over and over again, who told me point blank, if this kind of policy existed while they were on the streets, they would still be on the streets. And the second part was talking to a homeless gentleman in Vancouver, how these safe supply drugs were being, basically handed out like candy on Halloween to addicts, who were then selling these drugs to their drug dealers or exchanging them for fentanyl, which is the drug that they actually wanted. And then these notionally less harmful substances were being resold on university campuses, college campuses, even high schools. So finding that out was really shocking.
So for safe supply, it's almost like giving people currency to go purchase whatever illicit substance they want.
Yeah, so what shocked me was going into this documentary, you hear a lot about the drug poisoning crisis. That was a terminology that was used a lot. So what I had envisioned, and this is pertaining particularly to fentanyl, was that people went to purchase other drugs and then were shocked to find that fentanyl was in them, and then they overdosed or whatever. And then what I found out was actually in the majority of cases, fentanyl is being sought out. Like these individuals who are sick are addicted to fentanyl itself, and this is what's being sought out. So when these safe supply programs were being set up, which basically handed out drugs without preconditions, slightly less toxic drugs, the addicts would just get these and resell them to their dealers to get money to purchase fentanyl, which is the drug that they were addicted to. It's the high that they were addicted to and seeking out. So that really shocked me and really changed my perspective on the entire situation.
Wow, that's shocking to hear. Now let's talk about how EMS and police have been dealing with the opioid crisis. What has it been like for those you interviewed?
Well, the police, I think there's a couple things on that front. The police that I spoke to, retired VPD officer and the head of the Vancouver Police Union. First and foremost, they don't feel supported by City Hall at all and politicians, whether they be at a municipal or provincial level. Now, I will say, a week and a half after this documentary, when it had about 250,000 views, there was a big municipal election in Vancouver, and the incumbent mayor got beaten pretty badly by almost 20%, which is kind of unprecedented in the history of Vancouver. So hopefully things are starting to change. But as it stood, the Vancouver police felt not supported. They're under-resourced, and maybe most importantly, they feel as if their hands are tied on dealing with this. And the number one point on that isn't so much the police, but the justice system. So I talked to police officers over and over again who, some cases, would arrest an individual for whatever crime it may be. They'd be booked by the justice system, and then they'd be released on a promise to appear, which they would never appear for. And in some instances, that same police officer would arrest the same individual for the same crime twice within 24 hours. And it was this literal revolving door system. And there's some incredible stat where it's just a couple dozen individuals that are responsible for 75% of the crime in Vancouver, because you just have between the judges and some of our laws, this revolving door where the people are allowed to commit crimes over and over again with virtual impunity.
Now, how does the mainstream media play into all of this? Do you believe there is a willingness to ignore the facts and just support the government-approved policies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a couple issues. I think there's politicians that have up to now failed to find the political courage to take a stand on this issue. And then you just see with the mainstream media, like you do on so many issues, this kind of uniform opinion making, where they all just start echoing each other and speaking or singing from the same song sheet, as it were. And you see that when it comes to issues like harm reduction, like safe supply. You see it in the media. You've got kind of these, we'll call them left-wing groups, because it's probably the most accurate way to describe them, who come up with these euphemisms for various policies, like safe supply. Like you can't call them safe injection sites anymore. You call them overdose prevention sites. And the media all too often just basically copy and paste that narrative supplied to them and just goes along with it. And but the thing is the facts don't lie. So 20 years ago, when these policies surrounding harm reduction started, because there was a crisis in Vancouver and BC, you were looking at about 150 deaths from overdose every single year. Now, after 20 years of harm reduction in BC, we're at over 2,000 deaths per year. So the facts don't lie, the figures don't lie. Obviously, the policy hasn't been working, and anyone that's been living in downtown Vancouver or working there can see firsthand that it hasn't been working.
Now, you mentioned that the mainstream media and politicians are singing off the same song sheet, to quote you. What are some of the potential solutions politicians have proposed in dealing with the addiction and homeless issues in the Lower Mainland?
Well, up until quite recently, all politicians have been saying is that we haven't been going enough. We haven't thrown enough money at the problem. We need to buy up. What's happened in BC, they were buying up all these hotels during COVID and trying to warehouse addicts and homeless people in them, which had disastrous consequences, especially for the neighborhoods surrounding those purchased hotels and for the addicts themselves. Now, starting to see some things change at the federal level. Pierre Poilievre did a video in Vancouver speaking out on these issues, calling out safe, quote unquote, safe supplies as an oxymoron that wasn't working, and talking about instead of handing out free drugs, focusing on recovery and treatment and really returning these individuals, rehabilitating them and returning them to being productive, tax-paying members of society again, which I think has to be our goal. And I think actually that's the compassionate goal, because what we're doing now, warehousing them off in some shanty hotel somewhere and throwing free drugs at them notionally in perpetuity, I don't see how that is the compassionate solution. I don't see how that's good for taxpayers. I don't see how that's good for anybody. It's like we've managed to find a lose-lose-lose situation.
Many Canadians may not be aware of just how deep and widespread public policies of harm reduction go. What have you witnessed?
Well, in Vancouver, this is, so people understand, this is pretty much the capital of quote unquote harm reduction policies in the world. Vancouver considers themselves, and the people behind these policies consider themselves on the cutting edge. And they've certainly gone to places that no one else has gone before. The amount of open drug use, obviously, BC and the federal government under Justin Trudeau signed an agreement to decriminalize all drugs, or hard drugs, which has allowed dealers to move things like fentanyl and crack and other substance, crystal meth, much more easily. You have a rapid expansion of safe injection sites, or they like to call overdose prevention sites. And then you have what they view as kind of the ultimate harm reduction, which is safe supply, which is handing out free drugs with little to no barriers. You don't need to, be on some kind of medical treatment plan. You basically just go and sign up for it. And, you get some essentially off-market heroin provided for the government, provided by the government, paid for by taxpayers, and supplied in perpetuity. So, that's the full extent of harm reduction fully realized. The one thing these activists would like to see it go even farther would be for the government to provide actual fentanyl to these addicts, which we're not there yet, but never say never in the way things have been going in Vancouver.
Now, in Lethbridge here, when a supervised consumption site closed, there were a lot of individuals that were displaced. Vancouver's users are on a much bigger scale. What do you think could happen?
Well, I think what needs to happen, or what should happen, the supervised consumption sites, individuals aren't living there. So there's two things. One, we need to get more treatment and recovery facilities, and we need to get these people in treatment and recovery facilities, because that's where they should be. They're sick. Addiction is a mental illness. They are addicted to these substances. And, I view that compassionately as part of a holistic kind of healthcare approach. And healthcare is provided for by the government in this country. So I think we need to help get these people better again and well again, and off these dangerous, toxic substances. Now, the other thing is part of the other approach that maybe you were kind of alluding to there is the alternate approach of not trying to get these individuals off of these substances, and instead warehousing them in perpetuity at what are called SROs, single resident occupancy, these hotels, these buildings that the government has bought up. And problem there's a couple issues. For one thing, if you're trying to get clean and you're living in one of these places, good luck. We interviewed one addict who got clean for a month and then needed a place to live, and the government sent him to one of these hotels that they had purchased. And he said within 10 minutes, he had 3 knocks on his door from people trying to sell him drugs. And by the end of the night, he had relapsed again. So that's the kind of situation that we are putting these sick people, and some of them trying to get clean, trying to turn their lives around. We're making it worse and worse and worse with all of our decisions. The other issue that's important to note is part of the homeless issue, at least in BC. I can't speak to Alberta quite as much, but at least in BC, is there are places for some of these homeless people to live, but they actually would prefer to live on the street or prefer to live in tent cities, because a lot of these buildings come with some basic rules of you can't be doing drugs in the hallway, or you can't be being up to certain other shenanigans in the evenings, and these individuals would actually prefer to live on the street or in tent city. And what they're demanding, and what the activist groups demand, is actually housing without preconditions and without rules, and kind of Lord of the Flies, laissez-faire, do whatever you want, which obviously is not sustainable and not fair and not reasonable to taxpayers.
Just a very, very sad situation. Aaron Gunn, filmmaker and producer of the documentary Vancouver is Dying. It's available on YouTube. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
With inflation and the rising cost of living these days, it is having a serious impact on our homeless population. Thankfully, we do have some dedicated people and organizations committed to providing help. To talk about the challenges of our homeless, the working poor, and those with addictions is Ken Kissick. He is co-founder of Streets Alive Mission here in Lethbridge. Ken, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you for having me.
Now, many of our viewers know what Streets Alive Mission is all about, but some probably don't. Can you just give us a snapshot of what you do here in Lethbridge?
You realize the snapshot's going to look like the photo of a football team. Just kind of quickly, there's the mission itself, and out of that mission, we do trusteeships, 181 people, $2 million that we manage their money. We have the pin bank where we do clothing. We have 500 individual clients with 12,000 visits a year. We have the warming, cooling, respite. We'll talk about that, I think, a little bit later, but it really, we phone, they can come in warm or cool in the summer and just kind of get out of the street life. Outreach 7 days a week. We are looking after encampments and just people out there looking for their wellness. Foot Friday, every Friday, street feet, helping them with their foot care. Care cuts, it's 2 days a week now. We provide haircuts. Nursing care, 2.5 days a week. Nurses come in. And then, of course, basic referrals. Then we have our repurpose center where we do all of our sorting. It's a warehouse area. We provide clothing, housing, house good, furniture. It's agency referred to run 6 days a week. So if people want to take stuff, they can go there. 219 12B Street. Then we have Exodus and Genesis recovery programs. We'll talk about those a little bit later. Currently, we have 15 women and 39 men that we're looking after. And then Sundays, we have Freedom Church. It's a fellowship that is largely made up of people in our recovery programs, and it continues to grow. And that's kind of the snapshot.
Well, it might have been an easier question for me to ask what you don't do in Lethbridge, Ken. Now, we have already had some bitterly cold days and weeks here in this winter. Can you explain how weather like that impacts the homeless population?
Okay, so when you're out there, they're susceptible to frostbite, losing fingers and toes. It lowers their immune system because they really trying to get sleep or whatever it is, and it really increases their survival stress. Okay, and that creates mood things, deepens hopelessness. So the cold weather, just like the rest of us, okay, it affects you, but with them, there's serious implications to it, and of course, the concern is that they also could freeze to death if there's not a place for them to get in when it's minus 35. So it's serious.
Now, the Lethbridge homeless shelter can fill up pretty quickly when it gets cold. So I understand the city has now partnered with Streets Alive to provide what is being called a 24-hour comfort center for vulnerable residents throughout the winter months. What does that mean, practically speaking?
So for us, the Daytime Mission Center provided that respite, telephone, bathroom, access to the pin bank, the care cuts and all that kind of stuff. And just they could come for coffee and not really a drop in, but just a place to kind of put your head together. We've just expanded that for 24 hours. So they can't sleep there. So there, excuse me, there's no mats or anything on the floor, that kind of thing. They're just allowed to come in and hang out, sit at the table. We've got movies or videos going. There's coffee for them. And now we'll do a breakfast, which is toast. We're doing a supper, which is like soup and a sandwich. But basically, it's just to get them in. Last night, we had 71 in the warming center. I think there were 120 something at the shelter. There is over 220 people on the street in the city, and we're struggling nasty weather to get them all in somewhere safe.
So Ken, are you seeing more homeless people this year compared to previous years? And if so, do you think it is in part due to the rising cost of living with inflation?
So the answer to the first part of the question is yes, we are definitely seeing more homeless. For us, inflation, I don't think is a big factor yet. Okay, addiction remains the primary problem for most of these people. Now, certainly, we are starting to see that trickle down effect of people at the low end of the rental scales and that are being pushed out and struggling to find places to live. Okay. But because of Lethbridge's community, people get taken into homes and extended family, but it's coming.
Now, how can viewers help, and what kinds of donations do you need to help in cold weather?
The best way for everybody that can to help is to pray for us. Absolutely. Other than that, we need warm clothing, mitts, gloves, boots, anything like that. We need food for our feeding program. Just because we're feeding them, we need help to do that. We need volunteers to come who are willing to provide a meal for 50 or 60 people, or at least make it up. And we can always use cash, that kind of thing. But yeah, right now, clothing, food, big need, and help.
Now, speaking of the cold, you have your annual Coldest Night of the Year walk, which is coming up on February 25th. Can you tell us what this is all about and how our viewers can get involved?
So the Coldest Night of the Year walk is something we've been involved in. I think this is our 11th year. And it was started to really bring awareness to the issues of poverty in a community, especially in the cold weather. It is managed by a group called Blue Sea for Philanthropy. And if you want to get involved, there's a number of ways. You can join a team, form a team, but the best way is you go to cnoy.org/Streets Alive Mission. And that'll take you to the website where we are, and it'll explain everything that you need to do, and it's managed from there. Our goal this year is to get 250 walkers out. And this year we will be walking in the downtown. The last few years we've been out at Land O'Lakes Golf Course, and we've been at Henderson Park. But this year we're going to start out of the new venue in Center Square, or whatever it is there, walking around Galt Gardens and that kind of thing. So it's going to be a fun day. And we'd really encourage everybody, get your workplace, you can get teams, you can get your family to get up a team, but go to that cnoi.org/Streets Alive Mission.
Now, for the last 2 years, we've been talking a lot about concerns with COVID, but this year, there's lots of talk about the triple threat of COVID, influenza, and RSV. How is this impacting the homeless population?
The homeless are pretty resistant and immune, and that's largely because of their lifestyle. They often can be sick, but they don't. The addiction and everything else overrides that, and often they've been through a ton of stuff, and so we aren't seeing not a lot of them got COVID during COVID, and right now, my staff is more susceptible to the flu and the RSV and the cold than the street population. They're almost bulletproof from that end, but it's because they live the lifestyle, so they'll often get sick, nobody will notice, and so they've got an immunity that we don't notice.
Now, Ken, while I have you with us, can you just share some success stories? And are there individuals who are overcoming addictions and rising up out of poverty?
This year, in this last month, we've just celebrated, or November, we just celebrated 8 120-day graduations. In the last 3 years, we've got 8 people with a year or more. there are individuals. We've got at least 5 men who now have access back to their children. In one case, he's actually now got joint custody. He gets them for a week. These are big things, especially for the men. A lot of times they lose custody and then they never get to see their kids again. And we've got other people. We've got 5 people that have been through the program working for us, anywhere from 9 months clean to 5 years clean.
Wow, amazing.
So the success is there. It's a combination of them putting in work and us putting in work. But the bottom line is they have to let God do the work.
And it's always amazing to hear those stories, especially when a parent's been separated from their child and then they finally get to see their kids again. Now, Ken, to what degree does faith in Jesus impact individuals in their recovery journey?
It is absolutely imperative. It is the key. All of our successes have come because people have engaged with Christ and allowed Christ in to do the healing. Most people are in addictions because of trauma. If we can get the trauma healed, then they can move forward. And all of these guys that have got their kids back, they're also church attenders now. They are actively involved with Christ in their life. So he is key. We do have some, it's not a requirement. We've had some that, have come in and they understand that we're biblically worldview based, and there is a certain level of success, but they never fully recover, and often they relapse in. The ones that can get out, you'll see it in their life. He is key. He is key to what we do.
And you know what? We're so busy. Christmas is just around the corner. It'll be here before we know it. So tell us about the Stuff a Bag for Streets Alive opportunity as we approach the holiday season.
Give us a call. Arrange to come and get a bag. It's a blue shopping bag like you would get at Safeway or something like that. And we just ask you to fill it with whatever. It can be filled with food. It can be filled with clothes. It can be filled. The idea is just stuff it and bring it in. We've heard of people that have taken 2 or 3. They take them to work, and then they ask people to bring stuff in at work, and they stuff the bags there. There's other people that go around to family events, and we've got people this year, instead of doing Christmas gifts at Christmas party, they're stuffing bags. So it's a fun thing. It's a little blue bag. Give us a call and come and get one.
Now, you have some interesting programs at Streets Alive. You listed a ton of them earlier on in this interview. Tell us about the Exodus Men's Life Recovery Program and also the Genesis Women's Life Recovery Program, and explain what happens here and the impact it's having.
So both these programs are what we call post-treatment. So this is not taking them right off the street, but these are people who have addictions, who have begun the process of wanting to walk free from it, and they're choosing us because they know we're also faith-based. So it's they recognize that there is an element of spirituality that they need to apply to their recovery, and from there, with both the men and women, there are classes. Some of those classes have to do with basic theory in terms of addictions. Others deal with the biblical base, boundaries, involving Christ, things like transformation, and those we apply all of that, and we walk with them. We provide housing through what we call stages 1 to 4. So stage 1 is when you're in the first 30 days. Stage 2 is your next 90. Then stage 3 and 4 are after that. And each of those is leading people to more independence. By the time you're in 3 and 4, you should be going to school or working at least part-time. Some have some health issues they're trying to deal with. Our success rate for the people is in the 70s, getting people through, and it's just growing. Like I said, we have in the last 3 years, we've got 8 guys that we know are more than a year, and we've got a couple of women that are more than a year, and there's everything in between. And so now we do have relapses, and sometimes the result of a relapse is death. And so we've had individuals in the program that have relapsed out, and they're no longer with us. The one thing we do know is that all of them are in heaven, because at some point in the way we just are who we are. We live Christ, and people figured out that, hey, I need him. And so that's kind of what we do.
Well, thank you so much, Ken, for speaking with us today. That was amazing to hear all that's going on at Streets Alive Mission and all those wonderful programs that you have.
Thank you very much. And of course, if people want to donate, they can just go to streetsalive.ca and click the donate button. They can also sign up as a volunteer. And actually right now, we have some staffing needs in that 24-hour operation that we're running, warming center for the next 3 or 4 months. So if people are interested, they can give us a call. And thank you very much for having us on.
Ken Kissick is the co-founder of Streets Alive Mission in Lethbridge. I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.